I've heard whispers of this place since I was barely a child. Every generation had their own stories of the witch. Some say she was a benevolent hero. Others that she was a wicked temptress, there to seduce and destroy. While others have a more morally grey view of her. Beware on the 31st of October, on Halloween, the night the witches walk. Lock your doors and line your windows and doors with salt. Watch out because you can't see her, but she can see you. A mistress of wicked spirits, demons, and all sorts of known and unknown cryptids lurking in the woods. There were rumors of a strange woman who would fill children's dreams with whispers, some good things and some bad. It's a bit over the top if you ask me. But the tourists and some of the more eccentric locals love it. Living near the Umber forest, I heard most people only ever explore the outer regions, with the inner sanctum being her domain, and few had ever seen it. I figured it was a folk tale, nothing but a story, to keep kids from wandering too far into the forest and getting lost. Every so often, someone would say that they saw the witch, usually just a glimpse of her, sometimes just before or after a traffic accident or some other kind of tragedy. I didn't believe it until I saw her for myself. I was home alone. My family went on a trip over the weekend, and I didn't go because I was busy with schoolwork. And in truth, I didn't want to go. I didn't want to see people I barely knew, or because of some distant blood relation. My house is a relatively simple one. We can look outside our windows and see the trails leading into the forest from the front door, while the kitchen is at the back of the house, looking into the lush green backyard. There is no car park on this side of the park, and usually the only people who came around this way were locals rather than the tourists. It was late at night, and I went downstairs to get a drink from the kitchen when I saw a shadow pass by the window above the sink. I jumped, remembering not to react just in case. As the folklore said, any loud noise could disturb her and make her attack you. The house suddenly had a sharp chill throughout it, and instantly I thought the heating went out, so I checked the AC. Everything was working as normal. I could see my breath. I was shivering and brought up my shoulders to keep the warmth in, frantically rubbing my hands together to drive the chill away. Suddenly it started working again, and I figured it was just a glitch. I went back to the kitchen, opened the fridge, and glared inside, before taking out a piece of leftover pizza. I've never believed in the tales, so I figured it was either a trick-or-treater, or that I simply wasn't used to being home alone. I smiled when I heard the soft sound of rain and the chirping of crickets, and went back to the lounge room to watch TV. Just in case it got dreadfully cold again, I wrapped a thick blanket around my shoulders and hoped the AC wouldn't break again. I turned on the TV, and it was some true crime murder mystery. Considering what just happened, I wasn't in the mood for that. So I flicked the channel until I found some ridiculous, over-the-top horror movie from the 70s. My favorite. So bad it's good. I sat watching for a while, wishing I had some popcorn. Then I realized there was a shadow person sitting beside me. I froze, looking out of my peripheral vision, and saw the seat next to me was empty. But when I turned my attention back to the TV, I saw the same shadow there. I was unsure what to do. If I turned the TV off, would it prompt it to move? Or maybe hurt me? I focused on the reflection on the screen. It was blurry, difficult to see any defining features, yet what I could see was long black hair and a white, long, older-fashioned dress. Her face was blurred, burned even. Her hands were coated in char and twisted into a broken and unnatural shape. Her chest rose and fell as though she was breathing, and a slow, rasping breath gradually got louder. I leaned to one side, away from her, my eyes gripped to the screen, and slowly her face turned to look at me. I let out a whimper when the TV suddenly switched off. Still, the reflection remained. Get the salt from the kitchen. Draw a circle around yourself with it. Quickly, you don't have much time. I heard the voice in my head, soft and sweet, the source completely unknown. A low growl echoed when an abyss for a mouth opened, and I saw it leaning toward me, my body unwillingly being drawn toward it, and, quick, it urged me, and I shot up from my chair, sending the blanket flying, and ran into the kitchen. Instantly, I heard a horrifying shriek close to my heels, and I opened the kitchen cupboard, finding the salt, opening it, and circling it around my body. The light bulbs above me burst, and the only light from the moon and stars permitted me to see. I saw it approach, sniffing around the white powder, and it tried to reach through, only to have its fingers burn. It yanked them back. The sizzling brought about a foul aroma. I covered my mouth with my hand and sleeve, watching it circle, trying to find a weakness in the barrier. Once it was done, it faded away, and I wasn't sure whether I should step out of the salt circle. I opened my phone and debated sending a message to my parents. But what, really, could I tell them? That a ghost attacked me? And that I heard a voice telling me to spill salt on the ground? They'd never let me stay home alone again, and would likely be concerned for my sanity. I saw they messaged me in the family group chat, and while I debated telling the truth, instead, I said I was okay and asked how the drive went. They said it went well and rambled on a bit about what they did on the road. They sent me a selfie of them all happily settled in their hotel room. I said they looked like they were having fun, but didn't send a selfie in return. Like usual, my family loves sending random pictures of anything and everything to each other. I got a couple of messages asking me to take a selfie. I warned them that the kitchen light bulbs messed up, and took one, aiming in a way to hide the salt on the floor. I sent it, and told them I'd be going to bed soon. There were messages saying good night, to make sure I locked up, and that they would message me in the morning. I was about to put my phone down to clean up, when I saw a message from my brother. It said, "Who's that behind you?" I rolled my eyes. He loved playing pranks on people, and nearly every picture I'd send would have some weird kind of response. I put my phone on silent, spent some time looking around, and hurried to my bedroom. All I wanted was to hide under the covers, where I felt safe, and practically leapt on my bed, pulled the blankets around me, up over my head until I was cocooned. My body was heating up the blankets, and I was relaxing, getting ready to sleep, until I heard the slow strain of the floorboards near the doorway. I held my breath, and then I heard them creaking, each step getting closer to the bed, and I covered my mouth to prevent any sounds from slipping out. My mattress shifted with the new weight, and I felt something climb up over me. That foul aroma was back, sticking to the air, and all my bones started to ache, like needles piercing and twisting inside them. I felt an unnatural urge, against my wishes, to pull back the blankets. I held my hands tightly to stop myself, and closed my eyes. You shouldn't have left the circle. There was that same voice again. You must face it now. What? No, I whispered, feeling tears building in my eyes. If you don't choose when, it will. Listening to a strange voice got me into this mess. I exhaled sharply, threw off the blankets and sat upright, with my fists clenched and gasping for breath. I wasn't sure what I could do. Instead, the moonlight trailed inside my room through the cracks in the curtains. Whatever it was had disappeared. I lifted my phone to use the light from it and looked at a message I sent. Under my brother's first response were messages about how he was sure he saw a face and that it looked super creepy. He had zoomed in on it, and sure enough, behind my shoulder was the image of a face staring back at me. I looked at it. The eyes and mouth were concealed, though now I could see more closely. They were stitched over. The mess of black hair on either side, and a stiff pose. Whoever this ghost was, I guess, had suffered greatly before they died. What did they want with me, though? Surely I wasn't responsible for their eternal agony. Who is she? I whispered to myself, half expecting an answer, only to find none. My room, now quiet, no longer felt comfortable, and I didn't want to stay here. I got out of bed, walked down the hallway and checked each room. I recognized each setting. The furniture and personal items were all in the same place they had been left. I didn't feel a connection to these places. The rooms felt empty without my family in them. I looked at my phone again, sending, "Haha, you're right. It does look like a face," back in order to prompt my family to respond. None of them did. I figured they were sleeping. I walked downstairs to the lounge room and gazed out of the Umber forest. A rather cliché pale mist moved through, giving it an eerie supernatural feel. I would have enjoyed it until I saw a figure standing across the road staring back at me. Their silhouette remained still, oblivious to the increasing wind as hair and dress swayed around them violently. It wasn't the first time random locals would occasionally make their way over to this side, but she didn't look lost nor frightened. I couldn't see her face clearly, but she looked healthy rather than burned and mutilated. I felt drawn to open the door for her, walking toward the deadbolt and resting my hand on it. Hesitating, I peered through the peephole of the door and saw nothing. Exhaling, I opened the door and felt the cool breeze of the night air, and walked to the end of my porch to get a better look at her. She didn't move, standing steadfast in the wind, and deep down I knew it had to be her. I closed the door behind me and walked out. The weather surrounding me was wild and untamed. My body was dripping wet. The chill clung to my body, and there was no escaping the pain I felt. The asphalt beneath my bare feet was slippery, and I crossed the road and came to the edge. I gazed back to my house, along with all the other houses on the road, a decent gap between each one. The porch lights were still on, and only darkness coming from the windows. My family's front door was open. A silhouette stood there that had begun its journey toward me. I had a choice, an impossible one. There was a horrific screech, followed by a flash of bright lights. Pain ripped through my body. A burning sensation took hold of me, and I fell backward on the ground. Unsure what happened, and fearful of going back home, I ran toward the woman who faded into the mist. I figured once daylight came, I'll come back home and tell my parents what happened. I checked my phone. There was a thick crack down the middle, and it fell apart. I ran into the forest, past the wooden tables and chairs set out, the barbecues, and any other signs of civilization. Finally, I lay on the trunk of one of the ancient trees, surrounded by those of equal age, resting my head on the coarse bark, snuggled between two roots, and supported by the soft moss. I woke up at dawn, smiled, looking at the 3 trees protecting me, and remembered what happened last night. Perhaps the isolation got to me, or maybe I was having some kind of mental health issues. I wiped the sleep from my eyes, stood up and walked back home. The forest felt peaceful, especially so in the morning, and I heard sirens disturbing that peace. I frowned, annoyed but curious, and made my way there at a quicker pace. I saw red and blue flashing lights, with one part of the street taped off by police. My parents' car was there, along with an ambulance, and a body being taken away. I saw my family standing there, crying, and I called out to see what happened. I tried to cross the road to meet them, but I was shoved back toward the forest. I kept trying again and again. Then I saw my little brother staring at me, not recognizing me, and I realized I had become part of the myth of the Witch of the Umber Forest. I Haunt a Graveyard. Written and narrated by Lady Spookaria. The place I call home has been an official burial site ever since the 12th century. Well, except for a mass grave from a battle that caused this land to become cursed or blessed, depending on whom you speak to. Countless generations of undead and extinct families reside here. Plague victims, war victims, complications during pregnancy, old age, the elderly, children, anyone and everyone has been buried here. And once more, every single night, we all come alive and walk through the grounds together. It is under a national trust, which means there is a caretaker who ensures all the graves are maintained and there is no property damage. The longest the caretaker has managed to stay here was 20 years, before he went insane. I don't know if it is something in the soil that gives the land its power, or whether it comes from the ancient trees. No one knows. Imagine at night time being greeted by Old English, or Old Gaelic, or even the ancient forms of Norse. Perhaps some Old Latin here and there. Or perhaps a raiding party remembering their old days of pillaging and running through your house late at night. Or maybe by frightened children during the Blitz. Or consoling others who are buried far from home. I would love to say I was one of those exciting people with an amazing death. Unfortunately for me, I passed in 2020. And no, not during a certain plague. You know, the one that caused the toilet paper issues. I, unfortunately, passed in isolation due to an allergy and not getting to the phone in time. It was too long until my body was found, so I kind of look like a zombie. My funeral only had a few people who were able to get clearance, social distancing and all that. I was asleep inside my grave. I woke up with the wood barely an inch above my face. I remember panicking and scratching, trying to get out, and pleading for someone to come find me. You can imagine my surprise when a Viking reached down, still in armor, and pulled me out and greeted me in a language I didn't understand. The ghost came to welcome me, and in a blur, I realized I was here. Now. I didn't consider myself to be dead, so this was terrifying. I ran from one place to another, lost and confused. It was pretty embarrassing looking back. Ghosts were trying to get me to calm down, but can you imagine how it felt to see all these different ghosts, moving with their injuries, reaching out to you, and telling you to stop? I ran faster than I'd ever managed to, until I reached the iron gates. They were closed, locked, and I wrapped my hands around the bars, shaking them violently. I called out to the people walking their dog, begging for them to call someone to let me out, and their dog started barking like a maniac before being dragged away by the couple. Occasionally I reached out and called to different people who walked along the footpath, going about their lives, begging with them to help me. I don't know how many days and nights passed until I realized they couldn't see me. All they could catch a glimpse of was the iron gates banging against each other.
I was scared when I woke up too.
A soft voice greeted me from behind. I turned around and saw a little girl, her teddy bear tucked under her arm, and staring up at me with big brown eyes. My heart ached with how young she was. There were scars of an IV on her arm and around her nostrils. I didn't know the cause of her death, but clearly she was receiving treatment for a long time, and it didn't succeed. She was buried in what looked like comfy pajamas. "Hey, where am I?" I asked softly, lowered myself down to meet her gaze.
"A graveyard. St. Thomas, I think,"
she answered, turned the teddy around to face her, and started whispering to it, hugging it tight against her small frame. "I'm Sophie. What's your name?"
"Layla."
I figured it would be crass for me to ask a child how they died, or if they saw their parents recently. I saw a medieval knight walking alongside a monk, with the middle of his head shaved. They were speaking a version of English I could barely understand. I stared at them in wonder as they passed, unsure what to say, and they went to sit with some people dressed in 70s clothing, all hanging around and drinking while chatting amongst themselves. I wish I could have lifted my bottom jaw up, but nothing could prepare me for this. Watching them, I truly felt like an outsider.
Hey, you're staring,"
Layla warned me, then leaned close to whisper,
"Some of them don't like it when you stare."
Immediately my focus was drawn back to her.
"Is everyone here dead?"
I whispered. She frowned at me, then nodded and pointed to the house on the hill, and I saw a woman approach me.
"I imagine it was a shock. I'm Mrs. Harris, the caretaker's wife. I see you have Layla here to look after you,"
she answered, giving Layla a loving smile, and staring at her, I realized she was among the living, completely outnumbered around the dead.
"It will be okay, Sophie."
I wondered how she knew my name, but she was here, setting things up for my funeral. "Are we trapped here?" I asked, looking at the horde of people throughout time, each dressed in the clothes they were buried in. The sorry souls who were buried in paupers' graves walked around in barely a funeral shroud. However, they didn't appear concerned by this, and nor did any others. We were all equal in death. I couldn't help but stare when I glanced back to where Layla had been. I noticed she was gone. My question unanswered, I decided to walk to the iron gates. First I tried to open them, and my hand burned when I touched the surface. I pulled it back, gazing at my wounded palm, and for the first time, I felt pain. I stared outside, realizing that I was indeed trapped here, and wondered when I'd see my family or friends. The day came when they finally came to see me, bringing flowers, and while they couldn't see nor hear me, I could see them. I could hear them. I hated how I missed out on parts of their lives that mattered to me. They promised they would come and see me again soon, and watching them walk to the car, I wished I could have gone with them. Some of the ghosts would gather together, a celebration that the caretaker would put on for them. He and his wife cared for us as though we were family. They'd light candles, wine, water, food, all for us to let us know we were loved and thought of. In the children's section, his wife would sit and read a bedtime story, and would leave a nightlight out in case they would get scared. They'd assist the ghosts to trace their missing family members so they could say goodbye or speak words that should have been said in life. The one night, the only night I could leave was Halloween. All the spirits would leave and go wherever they wished, to see families buried in different places. Even from across the globe, they could see and meet with each other. I could go to my family's house, decorated for Halloween, and watch them, but I had to be back before midnight. I felt a sharp pull that I tried to resist by clinging onto the doorframe, but it was no use.
I remember screaming until another guest, an older lady with a grey bob, thick sweater and a kind smile, said, "First time, the more you resist, the worse it will feel." With her warning now in mind, I walked back, refusing to be dragged, all back to the graveyard, and saw all the other ghosts return from their quest. While physically the gates were still open, spiritually they shut violently behind me. The loud clanging sound sent a jolt through my body. Soon my parents only came for big events, and finally, they were too busy with their lives for me at all. Years passed and I made friends among the ghosts and learned about them. They became my new family. Still, my parents would try to make the effort. Both of them were old now, and soon my father joined me, buried in the same graveyard. I remember watching his funeral and my mother crying by his gravesite, longing for the day she would be returned with us. I heard his muffled screaming down below, under the sacred earth. "Hey, Dad," I said, offering my hand in welcome to his new, deadly life. I pulled him out, and it took him a moment to recognize me. Confusion, fear, both emotions were perfectly normal, given the circumstances. We hugged while crying, happy and sad at the same time to be reunited. I introduced him to everyone, and we even met some distant family members. Months passed while we waited until Halloween rolled around and went to see Mom. With trick-or-treaters on the streets and decorations lining the walls, it was definitely the spooky season. We walked through crowds of dressed-up people. Some of them would shiver when we passed through, and a rare few would stare at us in fascination, knowing that the spirits of the dead roamed this night. The outside of the family home was so familiar, with only a few minor changes. My dad froze, scared to go in, and putting my hand through the crook of his arm. Going home for the first time was always the hardest. I patted his hand to encourage him, and he gained his courage, and we entered our old home. Nothing had changed for him. We found her sitting on the lounge, watching her favorite TV show, a warm cup of tea by her side. The lounge room hadn't changed from last year. The only difference was there were no decorations this time. He sobbed, reaching out to touch her face, and she pulled the blanket up to protect herself from his cold touch. "She can't see us, but she can hear us when she's sleeping," I told him. We waited, and I watched my mother drift off to sleep with the television playing in the background. Her body started to tremble, and I realized the life was leaving her. She let out a long final breath and died in front of us. Her soul appeared standing upright and looked at us with a loving, tender smile, and faded away while my father screamed, falling to his knees. There was no reaper to claim her. Nothing, yet I still had hope. He called out her name again, trying to stand up, and took her hand, desperately hoping it would prompt her to return. I placed my hand on his shoulder, squeezing it to comfort him. "Don't worry, Dad. We'll see her again." Fortunately, her remains were recovered quickly, and she had made funeral arrangements to be buried beside Dad. We had to wait for a little while for the funeral, and for her body to finally be laid to rest. It grew dark, and nightfall finally arrived. The night of her burial came, and we stood by the gravesite with anticipation for seeing her again. Excitedly, we waited for midnight to arrive and for her ghostly life to begin. We were ready for her to call out to us, but she never did. We waited until morning. There was no calling out to us. We looked, we checked, but her spirit was gone. We never discovered where her spirit went. Ever since, century after century, I've listened and watched my dad grieve. A mourning with no end. And I don't know which is more painful, not knowing where Mum is, or watching and being unable to help my father. Now, we don't go anywhere on Halloween.
So, my Reno or renovation is haunted, and has been for around 10 years or so, I'd say, ever since the time I moved in. So, at least as long as I've been there. I'm not sure if he was there before or for how long, because it was before my time. My partner and I decided to escape the dreadful rental market in Sydney, so we began the search for a house, one that had 3 bedrooms, wasn't about to collapse on us, and within our price range. After getting a loan from the bank and some help from our parents, we were able to take the next step. We spent a lot of time searching, and finally found one. We knew we'd have to clean it up, and there were still some odds and ends. But the idea of not having to deal with a shitty landlord, my partner joked that someone must have died in the house, because one of the rooms had old gross carpet pulled up, exposing the wooden floor, and the walls had been quickly painted over. Needless to say, this room definitely stood out amongst the other rooms. If someone did pass away, our real estate agent didn't tell us. I don't think they have to, unless there was a murder, or if it happened in the last 5 years. I'll skip the boring parts. We moved all of our things inside, and worked on clearing out their old stuff. There were some good things, some furniture, but just a lot of junk we needed to throw away. Now, unless someone was in a room and wanted privacy, we tend to keep the doors open, so our cats have full roam of the place. I was walking down the hallway, calling out my partner's name, and I went past the bedroom. I saw a man standing there, looking at the doorway, and when I went to check, no one was there. I thought it was weird, but since it was a new house and I was still getting used to it, my husband was outside bringing in more boxes, and I figured it must have been a shadow or something. Our 2 cats lived like royalty and had free rein to go wherever, but even if we were both in that room, they'd hesitate to go in there too. They'd hiss from the door and would scream murder if we brought them inside with us. We even tried giving them treats inside the room, but they still didn't want to come in. The renovations kept going with the place, getting some new carpet and a lick of paint to make it look better. The bathrooms needed to be gutted and completely redone. Same with the old, tired-looking kitchen. The ghost didn't seem to care too much when work was being done on other areas of the house, but it was only when things were changed or we were in that room. I went in to take out the old-school plastic blinds, and the house took on an uneasy feel to it. Once it was off, I put it to one side and started painting with some samples of different colors. There were about 4 or 5 on the wall, and I was standing with a paintbrush in hand, comparing the different shades. Wanting to send a picture to one of my friends, I walked to grab my phone, and came back to what looked like someone's hand had rubbed the paint all together. It looked like an absolute filthy mess, and it would need work to fix it. I knew for a fact I hadn't done it, and my husband wasn't home. I stared at it for a while, pissed off, and took some photos to show people what happened. Some of my friends said that was really weird, and asked if someone had broken in, because the area we were in wasn't great. If someone did, then why didn't they steal anything? And there were no signs of a forced entry either. I showed my husband when he got home from work. He was just as confused as I was. Still, we invested our future and our parents' money into this house, so selling was out of the question. We painted the room anyway, and it felt like someone was standing over me while we were painting. That night, in bed, I told my husband about the feeling I had, and it turns out he felt the same way. Suddenly, we heard the door slam, hard. We both jumped violently out of bed, and while my husband checked the house for any signs of an intruder, my gut feeling was that it was the ghost. Over the next week, we'd be woken up during the night, and finally, I decided to try something. Perhaps it was because of all the sleepless nights, or maybe it was just an impulsive decision. I went inside the room, and it was freezing, even during the middle of the Aussie summer. "Look, I know you're not happy about us being here," I said. "We don't want to bother you, so here is the deal. We won't come into this room anymore and just use it for storage. I don't know why I went with this one, but we decided to call the ghost Billy, rather than William, which gives me the creeps, or D, but with an ick at the end. I think you know what I'm trying to say. There was no dramatic answer, no banging sounds or signs of agitation. I wasn't sure if it worked or not, until I realized that we could paint in there without interruptions. The sharp chill was gone, which, by the way, was really annoying in the summer, because it got so hot in there. The oppressive feeling was gone. We got the room done and kept our word. We stored boxes and random pieces in there. We'd see him occasionally when we passed by the room, but he wasn't a nuisance anymore. A good 7 or 8 years passed without any issues. I would love to say it had a happy ending and ended there, but we had friends who were staying over from the US, and we needed a place to put them. Neither of us thought too much about it. We put a mattress down in the room, and our friends stayed in there for the night. We were woken up by furniture shaking during the middle of the night. Our friend opened the door and came into us, and it was then we remembered our house ghost, Billy. They stayed in the lounge room for the rest of the trip. When they left, the ghost started slamming doors. There was loud stomping footsteps down the hallway, and we had to go in to apologize. The noise stopped. So yeah, I guess we won't be using that room as a kid's bedroom. I hope you enjoy this story. What did you think of it? Let me know what you thought in the comments section down below. Don't forget to stab the like button, subscribe, hit the bell and leave a comment. This video is made with the support of my incredible channel members, Patreon subscribers, and all my viewers. Thank you so much for supporting me. Don't forget to check out my social media accounts below, including my merch. Stay safe, my little spooklings. And remember, I'll be watching you.